I'm Catherine Perry, Executive Director of Leadership Winston-Salem, and I'd like to welcome you to our Leaders in Lunch conversation on housing solutions and framework for the future. Leaders in Lunch webinars provide a dynamic platform for alumni and community members to connect with influential leaders and gain insights on timely topics impacting Winston-Salem. These lunchtime gatherings featuring engaging presentations from local professionals, public figures, and community advocates who share their expertise and experiences. Leaders in Lunch offers a casual yet informative setting to deepen understanding and inspire collective action for community improvement. For those of you who may be less familiar with Leadership Winston-Salem, we're a nonprofit organization that works with over 100 community leaders each year to educate, connect, and energize them to serve and improve the community through the flagship and insight programs. Earlier this year, we gathered for a community conversation about what affordable housing really meant. That conversation surfaced a number of thoughtful questions from the community about long-term affordability, the role of developers and investors, housing for renters and seniors, and how we work together to address housing challenges. Today's panel builds on questions and shifts the conversation towards solution and future frameworks. For today's discussion, Mayor Pro Tem Dee Addams, LWS flagship class of 1991 and Insight class of 2016 will be our moderator. Winston-Salem Mayor Pro Tem and Council Member Dee Addams has represented the North Ward since 2009. She serves as the Vice Chair of the Finance Committee and Chair of the Community Development Housing General Government Committee. Addams is also a board member of the Winston-Salem Urban Area MPO Transportation Advisory Committee and an executive board member of several municipal organizations. She's been a strong advocate to affordable housing and addressing gentrification. Notably, in 2018, she promoted a comprehensive housing study and needs assessment study. In 2019, she supported the For Everyone Home initiative, which secured $225,000 in technical assistance from Grounded Solutions Network to develop equitable housing policies in Winston-Salem. In 2023, she promoted the Affordable Housing Development Program launched in 2024 to expand affordable housing options in the area. Councilmember Addams remains focused on preserving and expanding affordable housing within Winston-Salem. At this time, I will turn it over to Dee and our panelists to introduce themselves. Dee?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am grateful to be here and to be joined by three, I'll say, subject matter experts who are going to bring different perspectives to this issue. We have Dr. Stephen J. Seals, whose work focuses on housing systems, community research, and the structural drivers behind housing disparities. We have Sarah Odia, who works with the communities across North Carolina on housing development finance through the Development Finance Initiative. And then we have Lori Ingram, who brings a nonprofit and community development perspective to creating housing solutions. You can find their full bios in the chat. Again, thank you all for being here. Let's start by grounding ourselves in the big picture. This is broken down into segments, and segment one is understanding the systems. Dr. Seals, much of your work looks at the structural drivers behind housing inequities. What are some of the biggest factors shaping the housing challenges we're seeing today? How does the Forsyth County Humane Housing Network framework help to implement these real solutions?
Thank you, Dee. I'll start with those structural drivers. And we have to really go back a century and a half now and think about the legacy of racial segregation, the early 1920s to 40s redlining, and exclusionary zoning, all which were enacted here in the city of Winston and throughout the South. This isn't just background context. It impacts the shape of the city today. Who has housing, where housing is located, where food resources, medical resources, schools are all located, was dependent upon these mapping projects of the earlier 20th century. We see that today, as a result of segregation, redlining, exclusionary zoning, and urban renewal, minorities are disproportionately concentrated into high poverty areas and under-resourced neighborhoods. And this has impacted what development has happened since. If we project forward to today, we see an issue where we have a dramatic shortage of housing. Our success recently in economic development and luring businesses to the area has resulted in high population growth, but not substantial growth in housing to keep up with that dramatic population growth. We see that the housing that is being developed is more in the outer lying areas of Forsyth County, between cities in the Triad, areas like Kernersville and north and Rural Hall and west towards Clemens, but not in those historically segregated areas of town that need more infill development, upfitting of housing, better quality housing. Our shortfall today is more than 25,000 units projected by 2029 here in Forsyth County. And importantly, 8,000 unit deficit for those who are at the bottom of the income ladder, under 30% of our area median income. Families that are on fixed incomes, families with disabilities, retirees, veterans, etc., are in that gap of 8,000 units. And so they're cost burdened. This means that they're paying more than 30% of their income towards housing and housing related resources. That leads to housing precarity, whether you own a house and can't keep it up and may have a foreclosure, or if you're a renter and can't make those payments because of a medical bill or a car repair. We have more than 10,000 evictions in this county every year as a result of that housing precarity and that housing cost burden. We look to investors and developers to fix the problem for us, but the math, as one developer told me, doesn't math. The amount of capital that's needed to build housing exceeds the cost that people can pay for housing. So wages are not keeping up with the cost for us. The Humane Housing Network of Forsyth County has been meeting for 2 years now and has developed a framework for addressing affordable housing in this community. After several reports and studies, looking back at the 20 years of studies that have been done here, several that you, Dee Dee, have been a leader on. The conclusions of our framework are that we need to think about the housing continuum as a whole. It's a mobility system. It moves people from situations of precarity or even homelessness all the way to thriving conditions of home ownership and intergenerational wealth building. So we've looked at housing as urgent, stable, permanent to thriving conditions and thought about how do we move families from those situations of urgency and all the way to permanent and thriving conditions. We've developed a 5-year action network, a framework, which kind of flips the crisis model of housing to setting that goal for everybody to get to thriving conditions of wealth building and community self-determination. We've proposed 3 interlocking strategies of prevention, preservation, and production. Production is expanding the supply, filling those 25,000 units that we need, while preservation is keeping what we have already as affordable stock and in good condition. Prevention, finally, is stopping displacement through those evictions or foreclosures, but also by making sure that houses that we have are protected for folks in the future. We have 6 action work groups that have been started: gentle density infill, tax relief, housing repair, an advocacy and legal group, a communications, and a finance and fundraising group. There are opportunities for leaders across the community to join these groups. We're centering residents with lived experience in each of those working groups, but we're also building a coalition with nonprofit leaders, government leaders, developers, faith-based partners, philanthropic funders, all at the same table for achieving this long-term vision. So the Humane Housing Network is an action system designed to turn these decades of research and reports into actionable steps to improve the housing ecosystem as a whole with built-in accountability to the community. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Seals. And we know we look forward to seeing more from your organization and the gathering of our community to understand how all of this came to be and what needs to happen to help maybe eliminate it. Housing solutions also depend heavily, I say heavily, on how development actually works financially, which many people don't really always see behind the scenes, or as I heard just this week in DC, how the sausage is made. And with that, Sarah, from a housing development finance perspective, what are some of the tools communities can use through zoning, partnerships, or financing to help make these projects viable?
I'll say every community, there are tools available to local governments, how they can participate. There are tools available to the community at large, nonprofits, ways that they can be part of it as well. What it comes down to is I always think of it from a community by community approach, which is what is it that you need and want in your community, and how do you bring the appropriate tools to those problems that you have in your community. So try not to lead with the tools, I'll say. I can give you an example. So I'm with the Development Finance Initiative, and we're a program of the UNC Chapel Hill School of Government. And our work focuses on helping local governments figure out, what their housing needs are and identify opportunities for actual housing development. And so we work very closely with communities large and small to figure out how they can move a project forward. Our focus and our specialty and our expertise is real estate development and finance. And I can give you an example of a community that had some clear goals and that was looking for certain tools that could help them move a project forward. We've been working with Durham County now for many years. Is it 10 years? It can't be. Okay, it could be 10 years. 10 years. And they came to us originally because they had these 2 parking lots in downtown Durham. And if you are familiar with downtown Durham, I'm sure you're aware that it has grown exponentially over the last decade, 15 years. It's a different place now than it was during the recession. 2008 to today, it's worlds apart. And so what was happening is that downtown was changing rapidly. And the community was concerned that as it was changing, a lot of high wealth individuals, professionals moving in, and low income households would not have an opportunity to live downtown. So Durham County took this opportunity. They had these 2 parking lots. And they thought, okay, well, we need parking. We need parking decks. That was kind of the initial impetus for owning this. How do we actually use this to meet some of our housing goals as well? Now, you get a lot of pushback when you're doing something like that. People are like, but that's expensive property. Why don't you just sell it and use that money to build, housing in a greenfield? This goes back to their priorities, their specific goals, which was to make sure that they could keep low-income households within and keep a diversity of incomes within their downtown as it continues to grow. So they brought DFI on, and off the bat, that land, I will say, when thinking about the tools that you have available, land and the resource that is huge. In particular, in a place, I'll say, like Winston-Salem, that is growing rapidly. If you have those opportunities, it's a matter of holding on and figuring out what you can do and being very proactive on that property itself. So that's a resource. Don't lose that. And think about what you can do with that. And so that's what Durham County did. And they brought us on and we helped them think through what were their options for housing development. So what kind of public-private partnership, for example, could they structure to bring in a private partner who is going to bring the capital that can come with a private partner, for example, utilizing the low-income housing tax credit program, and pairing that with what a local government can bring, which in this case was that land, was thinking about how they could provide soft funding. So those loans, grants to close that gap between what the private sector can bring and what's needed. The other thing was, because it's downtown, infrastructure is a really big way in which local communities can participate. So thinking about, in this case, it was parking. It was thinking about how to help the development and the project work within a historic district as well. It was thinking about how to ensure that the sewer capacity was going to be sufficient to actually help this project come out of the ground. And so the work there in Durham, I think, is an example of using everything that you have, land, capital, zoning powers to make sure that you can build the density that you need and really kind of bringing the full gamut to the table. The other piece was that because this was downtown, one of the goals was also to include some commercial space. And what is challenging is when you're doing affordable housing, restricted affordable housing development, actually putting commercial space into that building can add substantial cost, and it can be incredibly difficult from a financing perspective. And so one way that the partnership worked is that they were able to put the commercial space within the public parking deck and allow the affordable housing to just be affordable housing. And so that partnership in terms of thinking about co-locating to meet these downtown needs was another big way that that was done. I think I answered the question. Let me know if I didn't. But that I think is an example of just kind of what is it you're hoping to achieve where and what is available in order to get there.
Thank you, Sarah. Research and financing are critical pieces to development, but we also need organizations that are working directly with the communities to implement the solutions on the ground. We're now going into segment 2, expanding housing solutions. Lori, from the nonprofit and community development perspective, what are some innovative or promising housing solutions that Anchor is exploring right now?
So thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Addams. I appreciate the question because at Anchor, we're not just talking about housing solutions, but housing innovation is one of our core values. So I really appreciate the chance to talk about this. But I would like to start by reframing the question a little bit because we like to talk and think about housing not just as a single project or a single solution, but start thinking about it and talking about it as an ecosystem that needs to be intentionally designed community-wide. Because if we don't start thinking and talking about it as a community-wide ecosystem, the market will continue to design it for us. And as Stephen just said, that has not served communities, particularly communities of color and vulnerable communities, in a way that has been beneficial. So we need to start and continue to talk about housing in a way that is larger and systemic. As an ecosystem that is community-wide in the way that we're building it, particularly affordable housing. So when we talk about housing development and innovation, what we're really talking about is how we build systems that are financially viable, community-centered, and sustainable over the long term. One of the biggest areas that we're pushing forward is mixed-use developments, as Sarah just said, and developments that are supported by new and creative financial stacks. And what that means in practice is that we know now that no one funding source is going to help us solve the problem of affordable housing. We need to be able to layer low-income housing tax credits, public funding sources like CDBG and home funds, city, county, state, federal dollars all together, private capital, philanthropic investments, our faith-based partners, and increasingly institutional and healthcare partnerships that are strategic, non-traditional housing partners. People who wouldn't have been at the table 10 years ago with us, hospitals, banks, other private institutions. And when we compare that with, or when we can pair that with mixed use housing, whether that's incorporating retail and services or community spaces into our housing, we're not just building housing, but we're creating spaces where people can live, where they can access resources, and where they can stay connected to their opportunities, to each other, to their service providers, all together in their spaces. We at Anchor are also deeply invested in long-term affordability. strategies, particularly through models like community land trusts, mission-driven home ownership for our resident populations. Because one of the biggest challenges we face is not just creating affordable housing, but it's keeping it affordable. Too often we build something that's affordable for 15, 20, 30 years, and then it transitions out of affordability just as the community needs it the most. We're very focused on creating housing that remains permanent as a community asset, and not just a temporary solution. And then I'd like to say as a final piece, and this is critical, that housing, again, cannot just exist in isolation. We've built out AnchorWorks, which is our workforce development and social enterprise initiative, as we integrate supportive services directly into our housing model. Because housing stability is tied to, as we know, income stability, health outcomes for people, and access to services. AnchorWorks includes case management services, housing supports, workforce training, long-term educational opportunities. And if we don't address these things together, we're only solving the part of the problem that accesses people to housing, but doesn't help them access other pieces of their life that makes them stable and successful. So whether we're working with seniors or individuals exiting homelessness or working families, we're designing housing environments that support long-term success and not just housing placement. So I'll finish by saying, because I think it's important to this room and every room that we're in talking about housing and affordable housing particularly, that innovation in housing is not just about new ideas, but it's about our willingness as a community, as community leaders, as elected officials, to align our values, our capital, and our community properties in a way that produces positive outcomes for our community members. And what we're focused on every day is not just building housing, but building systems that allow stronger people and thriving communities. So
As a follow-up, Lori, there is a lot of concern, about the housing affordability for seniors in our community.
yes.
The demographics don't lie. The data doesn't lie. There's a lot of boomers. So what strategies can help ensure that housing remains affordable long-term for our seniors that are on fixed incomes?
Yeah. So seniors are at the core of this conversation and their foundation of Anchor's work. We started primarily our mission was doing senior housing, and we continue to do that work at Goler Manor and University Place and Granville Place and Plaza, which are properties that we own and manage and have for a very long time. Seniors are one of the most vulnerable and affected population by the affordable housing crisis. And we continue this conversation as we continue to talk about Crystal Towers with Aspire. And as we move forward in those conversations, seniors are, as I said, one of the most vulnerable populations in this conversation, especially those living in fixed incomes. So what that means is being very thoughtful about the way we're structuring developments with again, deep subsidy layers with HUD subsidies and LIHTC projects, making sure that housing includes support coordination so that we're making sure that seniors can stay in their homes and age in place, and that they're not being affected by market fluctuations and other kinds of private development impacts that might otherwise cause seniors to have to move, and increasingly making sure that we're being able to take advantage of community land trusts and nonprofit ownerships and other kinds of long-term affordability covenants that allow seniors to stay and age in place. I'm sorry if you can hear that. Stay and age in place in their homes so that they're not impacted by other kinds of private cost escalations that might be happening in communities, because we are committed to seniors being able to stay in place, and housing should be a place where seniors can stay and age and thrive in their communities that they help to build.
That's right. Thank you. Moving on to all three of you, many residents see new housing developments being built, but feel those homes are not designed for them because they are not affordable. So the question is, As we work towards sustainable housing solutions, this is about barriers and collaboration. How are income-based qualification standards being evaluated for long-term impact? Requirements like 3 times rent may unintentionally exclude working families from qualifying from the opportunities. Um, how do we see that? Any one of you?
Do you want me to? I've been talking for a long time. Does somebody want to go before
Yeah.
me?
Because even though, one more thing, even though when communities agree housing is needed, implementation can be very difficult. Sometimes the biggest challenge isn't the idea, it's the community resistance or lack of alignment across the sectors. So the question to all of you, we hear the phrase all the time, not in my backyard, NIMBY. How can communities address those concerns and create more productive conversations around housing development instead of fear? What can current property owners and landowners in the local area do to help or hurt the current affordable housing situation? Example, people don't always realize that when they sell to venture capital firms or non-local real estate equity groups, they contribute to the problem by removing more options from local community network decision making. So again, our question all is, what does effective collaboration between local government, nonprofits, developers, and employers actually look like? Dr. Seals, you can go first.
Okay, there's a lot there. Let's start with the qualifications gap just briefly. Fair market rent, HUD's designation for 2026 for a 2 bedroom is around $1,200 for this area, and there's not a lot of $1,200. There's it's much more than that. But to meet that fair market rent, you've got to make about $42,000 a year. If you're a renter, the average renter in Forsyth County, you're making 15-20 an hour. That's $31,000 a year. You're already left out of housing. You're $10,000 shy of what you need. If you're a minimum wage worker, you're going to have to work over 125 hours a week just to make your rent, that 3 times rent. So income qualification is an issue. We have 4,200 vouchers under the Section 8 or Housing Choice Voucher Program designated for this area, though we don't always have that many vouchers available or that many landlords who take them. So there's a structural mismatch in trying to make the market fit the local income. We need higher wages to be able to make those rents, and we need ways to fill the gap between what landlords need in terms of rent and what tenants have. So families are squeezed. You add on to that if somebody has a criminal background, a credit score issue, a bad rental history, even if they have pets, we see that these issues are structural barriers for many people, and it inequitably impacts the community. So, as you said, what collaboration is needed? Well, we need across the board collaboration. It's in the interest of landlords and property owners to be able to rent their properties and get their income each month. On the other side, it's a benefit to the city and the county to be able to receive its tax revenue to keep up the infrastructure that's needed. It's important for the local community economics to be able to have shelter for our workers, our teachers, our first responders, our folks who are working in hospitals and elsewhere. So we really need to create some creative solutions, as Laurie was saying, and thinking holistically around workforce development on one side to raise those incomes, and ways to build a capital stack that relieves pressure on those at the bottom of the income ladder, with benefits for folks at the top of the income ladder included in there. So in the Humane Housing Network, we're talking about creating a good landlord package that might be an incentive for small landlords, repair mini grants if their properties have fallen into disrepair, expedited inspections with the city on developers so that they don't sit for years trying to develop a property and get caught up in all of the pre-planning process. Risk mitigation for small landlords so that they'll accept vouchers and provide homes for those who are on fixed incomes. So no single fix is going to be a solution. We really need all of those and above and more to really be able to create a system that houses everyone.
I've seen also, in addition to what Stephen's saying, things like master leases and sponsor-based solutions work for more vulnerable populations. I think as a landlord and particularly market rate and private landlords would say that they're using those qualifications to mitigate risk, right? They're mitigating their risk. I would say what we need to encourage them to do is move to models where instead of screening people out, they're finding ways to screen people into their housing. And the way to do that is some of the things that Stephen just described. So supporting them through mini grants for repairs. I've seen those. That has worked wonders in communities that I've worked in the past, is offering landlords money. If there's damages to your unit, we'll pay to have it replaced. Or fixed or repaired. And then again, master leases backed by nonprofits like Anchor, case management and support services in place for residents who landlords are afraid might be problematic, and things like that. But essentially, I think also there's an education component that, credit scores are not a great indicator of whether or not somebody's going to be a good resident. Credit scores are incredibly biased against women, against people of color. I think that women who've been divorced, women with children, single mothers, they are not good indicators of what kind of tenant somebody is going to be. But they are the most often used screen out tool for people who aren't going to get a unit. So I think that it's just kind of also a matter of kind of educating populations of private landlords, if they're interested in it, about what makes a good tenant in their units. And then in terms of collaboration, it's really about getting local governments to provide policy support around what fair housing looks like. And then really wrapping that policy support around housing providers, and then making sure that we can provide support services to folks who need it once they're in housing.
Thank you. Sarah.
I think everyone has said just almost everything I would have said. And I would add that I think what's important is that when we're having these conversations around affordable housing, we're often reducing everything to just this bucket of affordable housing. And it's really hard to identify solutions when you're dumping in what are a lot of big issues at different levels within one conversation, ultimately. And so really focusing in on, we all have supportive housing needs, right? Those are those deeply, extremely low income households. So what are the solutions and the tools and the partners that we need at the table to provide supportive housing, versus when we're talking about using the low income housing tax credit program, which is serving more of that low income households at a higher income level. And so how are we focusing our conversations, I think, is going to be important going forward, to actually, because so much has been said. I mean, the voucher program in itself requires an overhaul across the country in how we are bringing landlords into the program. And I just got so excited because Lori gave some really good ideas. And I'm like, yes, they need to be using that in my community because the vouchers ultimately we know can be the most effective solution to serving extremely low income up to around 50% AMI. But if you don't have landlords participating, what's the point? But it is that fair market value, that payment standard. The homeowner, the renter himself can only has to spend 30% of their income, which can be quite high for if you're only earning 20,000 a year. So there's some more focus that we need on that supportive housing side, on that voucher program expansion, and then thinking separately about how we're developing more and restricting more at that 60%, 70%, 80% of the area median income. And then building collaborations around those specific focuses.
Okay. Before we open things up to our audience, I'd love to end with a quick fire look towards the future. So, it's a lightning round, okay? So I'd like for each of you to briefly share if we want to meaningfully improve housing access over the next 10 years. What is one strategy or policy change communities should prioritize? You got 1 minute. Dr. Seals.
All right, I'm going to cram a lot into 1 minute. First, hitting your NIMBY question, I think one of the solutions to the not in my backyard, I don't want that apartment complex or whatever in my community, is really getting ahead of the problem by embracing neighborhoods and talking with them about what are your development priorities ahead of time, then inviting developers in to fill those needs. Second, we just need more capital. The capital at the federal level is drying up. The capital costs to small developers are too high. We need some local solutions to help fill the gaps. The Housing Trust Fund with the Winston-Salem Foundation and the city has about $4 million committed. It has a goal of $40 million to put into gap funding, but we need more than that. We need to be thinking about a bond again, a bond and or a 1 cent tax on $100 worth of property. Could really fill some of that gap that the federal HUD funds used to occupy. We need local, flexible funding that isn't beholden to 50 pages worth of forms each time you need to get a loan for development. So, bond referendum, turning NIMBYs into YIMBYs, yes, in my backyard, and coming in with a local 1 cent tax for flexible use in the housing space are my three.
Thank you. Lori?
Yeah, so I would say our strategy is based on preserve, produce, and protect. So we have to spend the next decade or so treating affordable housing as an essential infrastructure and then invest in it accordingly. If we don't act, as I said at the beginning, if we don't act intentionally, and the market will continue to act for us and not in a way that serves our communities well. The future of affordable housing depends on whether we choose to lead with our values rather than react to pressure. So we have to invest now and name it as a priority today, and that's what will show up in 10 years in our community.
Thanks. Sarah?
I hate going last because everybody says everything I would say because I agree with everybody. I will reiterate that we are in a point now where capital is desperately needed. We are seeing construction costs at an all-time high, and while they are sort of starting, we have some hope that it's starting to plateau. We won't see them go substantially down unless we put a focus on that. And so when I look at it, it's capital both to build these capital stacks, finance these projects, but also how are we thinking about alternative construction types? How are we bringing down the cost of construction in a meaningful way? Right now, it costs 300,000 to build a single apartment unit. 10 years ago, it was 150. So we're dealing with the same tools and the same financing we had back then. We have not adapted. And so we need to figure out how to bring down these construction costs. There are technologies, there's stuff out there. It just has not been invested in at the level that we're going to see it across the state anytime soon in a meaningful way. And so from where I sit, that is kind of our most pressing issue, which is how do we bring this down so we can produce at the level that we need? Because, you hear a lot of people talk about zoning is the answer. And getting rid of zoning is the answer. And while I will say that I understand that perspective and the fear of the lack of density that's allowed, it doesn't matter how much density you're allowed to build. If you don't have the money to build it and you can't afford to build it, no one will build it. And so I always kind of go back to that as what is needed in terms of expanding our supply.
Thank you. Thank you all. We are now going to open the conversation up to the audience. And if you have a question, please use the Q&A feature in the chat, and we will try our best to answer as many as we can.
Looks like we have 2 questions in Q&A already. And Sarah, you just touched upon one of the answers for a question, but a follow-up question on rising construction costs and how that affects affordable housing. Is gentrification a major issue when talking about affordable housing?
So I think it's really related to the NIMBYism question too, is it's a community resistance, it's our availability of land. And it's our ability to find where we're being welcomed and where we're able to find space. That's where we're running into problems. And it's a matter of being able to educate communities about our ability to build. So it's not a matter of gentrification in the sense that we aren't gentrifying, right? Because we're building affordable, we only build affordable housing. It's a matter of the land that we can afford when we're trying to build is in communities where we're having trouble affording being able to deconcentrate poverties, right? So we can't buy land in neighborhoods where we would like to kind of break down a NIMBY wall because we can't afford it. Does that make sense? We would like to ungentrify a neighborhood, but we can't afford to buy the land there.
It really goes back to that exclusionary zoning and redlining and the century-old process that has created this kind of bifurcation. High opportunity neighborhoods, as you pointed out, are expensive and have strong NIMBY pushback. Lower disinvested neighborhoods, low and moderate income neighborhoods, concentrate poverty, concentrate race, concentrate renters, and are ripe for gentrification, which then displaces people further. A healthy community is one where you've got a good mix of housing types, a good mix of housing of work opportunities, a good mix of incomes in a very close space. There are many ways to achieve this. And we need to be really thinking creatively about how do we get those affordable housing units in high opportunity neighborhoods, either through land use reform. Forward 2045 plan has some good provisions there for not getting rid of zoning, but for opening it up a little bit so that we have more housing types in single family neighborhoods. But we have to invest at the same time in those disinvested neighborhoods and infrastructure. Good schools, good resources, good food, so you don't have food deserts, good health care, so that you attract a mix of incomes to those neighborhoods and preserve character while also promoting a more diverse income strata. We can look at models across the country that have done this. We see places like Portland and others who've thought creatively about how to fill in with density in a balanced way without displacing too many people and preserving historic character. It takes that comprehensive vision and really education of neighborhoods so that they know that they have a role in this.
Sarah?
Well, again, they already covered what I was going to say, but I think on the gentrification front, when thinking, I mean, separately from affordable housing, but I think one of the things that is so valuable and important is that preservation aspect when we're talking about housing and is just keeping people in their homes. Because those community ties have significant value, right? We know for a fact, it's been studied, like there's a huge impact on just how much a community's kind of ability to build wealth with those ties, with the daycare value, with everything that comes with having neighbors that you know and have lived with for many, many years. So that strength of that community is really important. And so any kind of strategy that focuses on preservation and thinking about how to keep people in their home should not be in competition with building affordable housing and more density within that community. Should both be able to go in, and they can if you have the policies as well as kind of thinking strategically about where you build something like low-income housing tax credit development, which would maybe add 60 units into what has been a historically lower density neighborhood. So you have to do both hand in hand. You can't just do one.
Thank you. I want to ask you guys this. Which I already kind of know, but what can communities do to better educate residents and citizens about housing development, how it actually works? Because I've been saying for years that education and communication is the key. And if only the policymakers and the developers know all of what's going on and how it's done, and people like yourselves, then that's not going to work. And we're seeing it not just in Winston, but across the country of people pushing back because nobody talked to them. Nobody asked them if they knew anything. And I need to hear from you. What do you think communities need to do better to educate our citizens on how this works?
I think it's really getting out in the communities. We have a tendency to say, okay, we're going to have this public forum and people can come and talk about this issue at some place downtown. I'm guilty of this as well. I host things a lot of time at the public library because it's a great space. But we need to get out into the communities. We need to get out to churches and schools and community groups and neighborhood associations and really talk about the problem in real terms. Here's what the data says. Here's what the examples are in other communities. Here's what's your feedback? What's your emotion around this issue? And how do we address that emotion, which is usually fear of something we don't understand, respectfully, and also give you some tools to have input in the process. I think there's good examples. Gotten to know folks with the Happy Hill Neighborhood Association who are really studying the issue and thinking through proactively what can we do here for our community that is community-led development process and not developers doing something to us. I think we need more of that, and not just in those neighborhoods where we see opportunity to acquire land, but those high opportunity neighborhoods that have been historically resistant to infill development and opportunity. So more proactive and maybe less centralized and more out into the communities. I think also the churches We're seeing a lot of new development coming from churches. Metropolitan Village is a great example downtown. But we have others throughout the community. Simpara, Daniel Preifogel and others are training a cohort of churches right now to think about how they can lead the way for equitable development projects in their neighborhoods, preserving character, getting input from community members, leveraging the land that they have, and really serving the needs of the community. So I think that's another avenue that we can pursue further.
Okay. We have about 8-9 minutes left. I want to know if Catherine, do you want to get on? But I do want to insert some information. As I told everybody earlier, I just got back this morning from Washington, D.C. The city of Winston-Salem, along with all of the elected local officials were in D.C. For the congressional cities with the National League of Cities. And they had workshops. They had a very huge and well-attended workshop, which we all knew, about these two new bills that are coming through the House and the Senate right now. And these bills, they are saying they're major efforts are on the way at the federal level to lower housing costs and expand the supply. Again, this goes back to education. Two significant bipartisan proposals, the Senate's Road to Housing Act and the House's Housing for the 21st Century Act, aim to reshape key programs and unlock new tools for communities. At the same time, advancing executive actions focused on reducing housing costs, including new limits on large institutional home purchases. I have handout flyers that they gave us that I am going to email to Catherine and Abby, and hopefully they can get it out to everyone that's on this call. I think it's important that you read both sides for yourself, and even maybe contact your representatives in Congress or our representatives, as well as the Senate, their offices, to update you on what else you need to know about this. So, Catherine, we're going to turn it back over to you to close it out. Thank you, everyone, for participating and attending, especially our speakers, our panelists.
Before we go back to Catherine, there is time for one more question that we didn't get to. And Dee Dee, I appreciate you sharing that information on what's happening in DC. So the question is, and only one of you can answer, we don't need all three of you to, but how can public-private partnerships better align to address the different needs of seniors aging in place versus first-time buyers building long-term stability?
I'm going to say it's money.
I can take it, I think. Aside from money, I think that the most successful communities that I've seen have included just a full housing spectrum. There are some beautiful communities that include families housing and seniors aging in place and single units with efficiencies and 3-bedroom units with families with children. And it's amazing. There are amazing communities, even with daycares on properties. There's one in Columbus that has a little daycare that's staffed with the seniors who also live in the community. And that's built into their funding model, that they have an affordable daycare that's staffed with senior volunteers and so some of it is just kind of, again, doing innovative housing where we're thinking kind of outside of the box about how we're building generational housing and thinking about how communities are supporting each other, and seniors aging in place and being sort of brought into the mix of supporting new families that are staying in affordable housing. And some of those models are really, really beautiful, and built around workforce housing and young families and buying their first homes and then aging in place. So That's what I'm thinking. What we're trying to do at Anchor is we're moving forward and planning some of our affordable communities as well.
I just throw in ADUs. ADUs are a great way to provide housing. You have that three bedroom, two bath house that you've lived in for 20 years. You cede that to your children or another family, and you move into the back in an ADU. You're still in place. You've downsized but stayed in your community. Our density has increased, and you've provided more affordable opportunities. It's a neat solution, and I've seen it done in other locations with that aging in place, or even with IDD population, individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities, formerly homeless individuals. ADUs are a great way to think creatively around our existing community.
Okay, Dee Dee, now I'll take it from here.
Take it over.
My sincere thanks to you, Mayor Pro Tem Dee Dee Addams, for moderating this discussion, and to our panelists, Dr. Stephen J. Stills, Lori Ingram, and Sarah Odio, for sharing their industry insights with us. We appreciate your partnership and support of Leadership Winston-Salem. If you enjoyed today's discussion and want to continue the conversation, please join Leadership Winston-Salem after work today between 5 and 8 p.m. for Wine Down Wednesday at Sir Winston Wine Loft. Jared is going to put a link into the chat now to register for that. Also, tonight, Winston-Salem State and the Forsyth County Public Library is hosting their last 2026 Curiosity Exchange Speaker Series addressing the legacy of housing segregation in Forsyth County, presented by Dr. Russell M. Smith at 6 p.m. at the Downtown Central Branch Library in the third floor reading room. Jared is also going to put a link to the chat to that. Additionally, Aperture Cinema is showing the film Tow this Friday at 3 p.m., 5:30 p.m., and 8 p.m. This film is about an unhoused woman whose car is towed, and she's left with a shocking $21,000 tow bill. In the fight to reclaim her car and her life, she exposes a broken system and redefines what it's like to persevere against all odds. Tickets are available for purchase by the link that Jared is putting in the chat. A quick reminder that Leadership Winston-Salem is a nonprofit organization that relies heavily on the support of individual donors and corporate sponsors to provide the array of programming that we do. If you enjoyed what we offer today, please consider making a gift to the organization on our website by clicking the Donate Now button, or use the link that Jared has once again put in the chat. Lastly, recruitment is underway for Flagship Program, a program designed to ignite community leaders with a mission of educating, connecting, and energizing leaders to serve and improve the community. Likened to a community MBA, participants benefit through active engagement, attending one program day each month, participating in supplemental activities, and working in action learning teams to address an actual dilemma faced by a local agency. Details about our upcoming information sessions is in the chat if you're interested in learning more. Housing is one of the most complex challenges facing our community today, but conversations like this help move us closer to collaborative solutions and stronger communities. Thank you to all of you for being a part of this important conversation. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.